We all know that none of us are immune from stress. Okay, that's just a really blatantly obvious thing to say. But I want to ask you a question about you, and I'll just alert you. I'm going to make a confession in a moment, okay? But I want to ask you: Would you describe yourself as perhaps a stress head, a worrier? Would you use that language about yourself? Would other people use that language about you? Now, please, you don't have to answer out loud. And there's no judgment attached to this, because I want to say to you, I am naturally a worrier. Okay? That's my natural disposition, is to worry about stuff. But I think it's pretty important to face up to what we're really like, because unless we face up to the truth about ourselves, it's really hard to do anything about it. So if you think that's your natural tendency, I just want you to sort of tune in, think about that, and think about some of the things that we'll be saying and looking at this evening. And I also want to say, just before I begin, I'm very hopeful that nearly all of us, nearly everyone, can make some small changes that make a big difference when it comes to stress. Okay? So here's what we're going to be looking at this evening. There's two parts to the talk, okay? The first one is we're going to try and understand stress. Because when we talk about managing stress, it's really hard to manage something that you don't have a clue about. So I want to try and explain what it is, what causes it, and what impact it has upon us. And then in the second part, we'll look at some things about how we actually manage stress. The other thing I want to say, just before we do dive right in, is that I want to acknowledge that sometimes stress does get very overwhelming. And it can cause us to really struggle with life. It gets in the way of us doing all the ordinary and important things in life, whether that's your relationships, your work, your study, whatever's happening. Sometimes stress gets to a level when it knocks those things around and can leave us feeling very anxious, perhaps depressed. And if that's the case, I just want to say up front, I really want to encourage you to seek help. Okay? Seek help. And a really good place to start. If after tonight, I'll say this again at the end, but if after tonight you realise this is a problem for me, a good place to start is to go and see your GP and have a chat about it. Okay? All right, let's dive in. First section, understanding stress. And stress is a bodily response. It's about real changes within our physical bodies. It is not just something up here in our head. Okay? So, stress is a response that our brain triggers when any demand is placed upon us. When we find ourselves in a situation where we're required to do something or be ready to react to something, then we experience stress. And some stress is good for us. Stress is actually a really normal part of who we are. And I think a lot of what we call stress is probably better called distress, when there's too much stress or the wrong sort of stress. But our stress response, this response in our bodies, is actually a wonderful part of who we are. It's the way God has designed us to be. And without it, we wouldn't get anything done. Now, you might think that it's coffee that gets you going in the morning, but it's not. It's your stress response. That's what gets you out of bed and gets your muscles working and gets you thinking about all the stuff you've got to get through in the day. And a certain level of stress has a whole lot of good impacts upon us. And let me mention 4, okay? First one, stress motivates us. It actually improves our performance in life. Now, deadlines, of course, can be stressful, and I've been just constantly facing deadlines all this year. And can I say, having a deadline actually helped me get this talk done. As the time was running out, I thought I got really focused and motivated to get the work done. So some stress in our system, it will lift our performance, if you've got to give a talk up front. Or if you're facing an exam or if you're involved on a sporting event. Some stress is helpful. And two researchers, guys called Yerkes and Dodson, they studied the impact of stress upon performance, and they discovered there's this sort of inverted U-curve relationship between the amount of stress and how well you performed. So if you have a look at this diagram here, you'll see pressure, that's just another word for stress. Very low pressure, you're pretty bored and under, not very motivated. When there's too much, that can really freak you out. But stress, it's the Goldilocks principle, okay? Just the right amount actually enables us to do really well in life. So that's the first benefit. It motivates us. Second benefit, stress forces us to problem solve. Because normally when there's stress, there can be a problem, a difficulty, a challenge that we need to work out how to meet that. And as we do that, that builds our confidence and it builds our skills. And related to that is the third benefit. Stress, sounds weird, right? Stress can make your life more meaningful. Now, why do I say that? Well, when you have no challenges in your life, life can feel very ordinary. When we face something difficult and come through it, that gives us a sense of achievement. And the things we just breeze through, they don't actually have the same meaning for us. And it's very interesting if you talk to people who've been through significant adversity, hard times, they'll often say, look, I wish I hadn't had to go through that, but I realise I've changed, I'm a different person. That is actually really, I've grown through the experience. Now, I don't know whether any of you are familiar with this book. This is by Lee Sales, the ABC journalist. It's called Any Ordinary Day. She published it a few years back. Lee Sales had a life-threatening experience, and then she went out, she wanted to understand how people came through these things. She spoke to a whole series of other people who'd been in very difficult circumstances. People like Louisa Hope, who had been in the Lint Cafe siege back in 2014. And she talked to them, and what she found was that many people who go through these sorts of difficult experiences, they have a greater appreciation of life. They've gained an inner strength that sort of opens them up to new possibilities. And it often leads to closer, deeper relationships with the important people in their life. And that leads on to the fourth benefit that can arise from stress. Stress actually helps us to connect with others. Because a bit of stress can lead us to reach out to family, to friends, to others. And, small talk is fine, but when we need support, we tend to share more deeply about what's really on our hearts. And as we do that, that bonds us and connects us with others. It's a more intimate sort of conversation. And meaningful connections with others are profoundly important for our well-being. Okay, and I'm going to come back to that point near the end tonight. Okay, so stress, it's a bodily response that's a really important part of how we function. Now, what generates our stress response is what's called our autonomic nervous system, which has two parts to it. See here on the diagram. So the first part's the sympathetic nervous system. This is actually the stress response. This is our fight-flight response, which you've heard about. It's like the accelerator. It revs us up, gets us doing stuff. The other one's the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the other part of the autonomic nervous system. And this is activated when we're in a relaxed state, in a calm state. And that enables our body to do various sort of housekeeping activities. Things like digesting food or keeping our body temperature stable. And the thing about these two, sympathetic, parasympathetic, is they operate a little bit like a seesaw, a little bit like this. When one's turned up, the other tends to turn down. And that's why you feel drowsy after you've eaten a big meal, because your body's saying to you, hang on, we've got to digest all this food, slow down so your parasympathetic system can kick in to enable you to do that digestion. And that's why people under a lot of stress can sometimes have digestive problems, because their sympathetic is not allowing that parasympathetic to do its work. What is it, though, that actually causes this stress response in our bodies? And the answer is what's called stressors. Right? A stressor is something that makes a demand upon us, which means that sympathetic nervous system needs to kick in. And in terms of the things that make demands upon us, we normally think of external stuff, and we saw some of that earlier on, okay? Work, relationships, money, the other things that came up there, I can't remember what they all were. And here's a list of some of those things. If you have a look here, external stuff, things like pandemic, right? External stressor upon all of us. Work pressures, relationship difficulties, caring for children, caring for aged parents, health concerns, isolation. All these things can create stress for us. But there's also what's called internal stressors. We've all got certain attitudes and thought patterns and mindsets here in our minds that can create stress for us. So let me give you a few examples of this. Things like perfectionism. If you're a perfectionist, that can create a lot of stress for you. If you're sensitive to criticism, if you've got a tendency to catastrophize, if you have unrealistic expectations or a pessimistic outlook on life, if you're self-critical, a whole range of other things as well. Let's just have some examples there. And because we all have different attitudes and we have different ways of interpreting our circumstances in life, this is why similar stressful events out there, external things, affect different people in different ways. We interpret what happens differently. So let me give you an example. Let's say you fail an exam. Okay, now some of you thinking, I haven't sat an exam for, decades. Wonderful. But some of you, this might be a little bit closer to home. 2 people fail an exam. Okay, for one person, they are completely gutted and devastated. Why? They've never failed an exam in their life. And I think, what does this say about me? I'm hopeless. I'm a failure. Perhaps this means I'm going to fail every exam from now on. I'm not going to complete my degree. My life's a mess. Okay. Second person fails exam, and they say to themselves, they shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, didn't do any work. I deserve to fail. And they work on, and they're not very stressed at all. Okay? Same event, different interpretation of the event due to their mindset, very different outcome. The other thing about stress is, I spoke before about some of those positive impacts, okay? I mentioned 4 things. I left out the most important one, a really critical one. Our stress response is really good at keeping us alive. Now, let's think about the human brain for a moment. I look around this room, I see many, many remarkable people. I don't know, there's probably someone here who designs bridges. There's probably here people who can surf the waves with great skill and dexterity. There might be someone here who writes romantic poetry. Okay? The human brain can do all of these things, but the number one job of the human brain is what? To keep us alive, right? To keep us alive. And one of the ways our brain keeps us alive is through our stress response. Now, this is a big admission to make in this company, but I'm going to make it. I live on the other side of the harbour. Okay? You still willing to listen on? Over there, fairly close to where I live, is a place called Iron Cove Bay, and it's got a walk around it and a cycleway around it. And it's beautiful. 7 kilometres. Sarah and I walk it often. And the path, though, is shared by both walkers and cyclists. And I was out walking the other day, and I turned around a corner, and there's a cyclist right in front of me going at high speed, about to hit me. In an instant, before I'd even processed the fact that there was a bike in front of me, my brain did a whole lot of things, right? It secreted adrenaline. The adrenaline pushed up my heart rate, my breathing rate, my blood pressure. It made blood flow from my gut, digestion, to my large muscle groups so that I could either put up my hands to protect myself for the cyclist about to hit me, that's fight, or jump out of the way, flight. I did the latter. I leapt out of the way, okay? This is the sympathetic system doing its job to protect us and to keep us safe. And this system is active during our waking hours, enabling us to do all sorts of things. Not just jump out of the way of bikes, but to answer an email, to engage in a conversation, to drive from A to B. This is our sympathetic nervous system kicking in, enabling us to do stuff. But that fight-flight response, and the fact that I did jump out of the way of the bike, that's been around with us for, however long we've been on the planet, basically. So if you go back to a nomadic tribe, and you've got someone there and who suddenly is confronted by a saber-toothed tiger, what's he going to do? He's either going to get his spear and fight, or he's going to run very fast to get out of the way. Fight-flight response. But here's the interesting thing. Because our bodies are wired to respond this way to any situation where we feel under threat or any sort of danger or potential danger, that means we can have the same reaction in our bodies when our bodies don't actually need to be primed for action. We can feel stressed in our head. We can worry about finances. We can worry about a relationship. We can be worried about sitting in traffic, worried about we're going to be late. And you can be sitting in a comfortable chair or in front of a computer, and you've got the same chemicals racing through your body as someone who's trying to run away from a saber-toothed tiger or leap out of the way of a bike or do something else that's very physical. And this is where we often see those internal stresses bring a lot of stress into our lives. So someone fighting a bushfire, imagine the stress of that. Someone sitting in their chair worrying about something, same physical reaction in our bodies. And because our brains are so sophisticated, we have the ability to anticipate problems in the future, potential dangers that might happen even before they happen. And they may never happen. So let me illustrate this. I brought along a little friend tonight to show you. It's my little friend. This is Ziggy the zebra. Okay. I want you to imagine Ziggy. Ziggy's out there on the plains, the savannah in Africa, and having his lunch, her lunch. She's eating a lunch. And, in the grass, she hears a rustle in the bushes. What does she do? She takes off, right? She takes flight. Why? Because she's prepared to give up her lunch as long as she doesn't become lunch for a lion or something like that. Now, probably 99 times out of 100, the little rustle in the bushes might be a small animal. It might be the wind. She doesn't wait around. She wants to stay alive. So that's what her brain's wired to do. Now let me tell you what I think her brain is not wired to do. I haven't actually been inside a zebra's brain, but this is what I think. She doesn't worry about whether she's going to be lunch for a lion tomorrow. But we as humans, we might not worry about that, but we can worry about a whole lot of other things that may never happen. Will I get a parking ticket? Will this relationship work out? Will I fail the exam? Will I come down with some terrible disease? And those thoughts run through our head and they cause us stress, and we have this stress reaction in our bodies with all of these chemicals and that can be a problem. Because the number one job of our brains is to keep us alive, we all naturally have what's called a negativity bias. And by that, I mean we are much more tuned in to danger, threat, potential problems than we are into the good things of life, the things that are going well. It's almost like your brain, when it comes to good things, your brain is like Teflon. Just slides off. When it comes to bad stuff, your brain is like Velcro. It just sticks. Okay, I'll put Ziggy down over there for the moment. I want to talk to you about chronic stress, okay? Now, all of us go through periods of intense stress. It might be dodging the bicycle. It might be trying to rescue items in your house as the floodwaters rise, as some people in our state have had that experience recently. It might even be feeling under intense pressure to meet a work deadline. And our bodies are designed to cope with that very well for the short term. For the short term. But there's a big difference between the exceptional and the normal. And when we're in a state of high stress, that's called chronic stress, what happens then? Well, I want you to imagine a swimming pool. And your level of stress is the level of water in the swimming pool. Let's just say that the level is down around your knees, okay? So not a lot of stress. That's your baseline stress level. You're doing pretty well. And then a really difficult event comes, so there's a big wash up of the water and the water might come up to your waist. That's all right? Imagine your baseline level of stress. This is the way you live most of the time. Imagine if the water level's here. And then you're hit by something else very significant. And the wave washes over you, you feel like you're drowning. And many people in our society today live in that state of chronic stress. What's the impact of this? Well, you feel very uncomfortable living with chronic stress. And normally we turn to various things to try and cope with this. You might just shut down and sleep. And some people do that. They just withdraw, shut down, they may become depressed. Or often we turn to what's called soft addictions. So we binge Netflix, we binge eat, we binge computer games, we shop online, all of that sort of stuff. Or we turn to much more destructive forms of escape, and this is very, very, very common. What are they? Things like alcohol and other drugs, pornography, gambling, stuff like that, which come to control a person's life and actually create even more stress rather than relieving the stress. And chronic stress, it's not only uncomfortable, it's actually dangerous. Have a look at this quote from a neuroscientist, Lisa Feldman Barrett. She says, over time, anything that contributes to chronic stress can gradually eat away at your brain and cause illness to your body. It's not that your brain literally melts, it starts to impact a whole range of things in your body. Virtually every bodily system, the constant influx of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, they impact our immune system, the way the blood flows through our blood vessels, our blood pressure, the way insulin works in our body, the way that our digestive system works, and the way our brains work. And prolonged stress alters our brain chemistry, it alters our neural pathways, and that's why there's an association between stress and anxiety and depression. Now, how do you know whether you're experiencing chronic stress? I'll give you a couple of really common things that happen. The first one is to do with your sleep. You have trouble sleeping. And I reckon, if I got you to raise your hands, I'm not going to do it. If I got you to raise your hands, I reckon most people in this room would say, I know when I'm stressed because I have trouble sleeping. That's my experience. Okay? Either trouble getting to sleep or waking up during the night. The second thing that happens A second indicator is what happens with our emotional life. Your emotions become more fragile. So you feel more anxious, more irritable, more teary. You find yourself weeping at an advertisement on the television. And you think, why? All sorts of things like that can happen. There's other stuff as well, things like muscle tension, headaches, digestive problems. But sleep and emotions are pretty good little indicators for what's going on for you. And again, let me just say again, if you recognise you've got a significant problem from stress with what I've just said, and it's impacting your life, please go and seek some help. Okay, that's the first part, understanding stress. The second part, managing stress. That's what this talk's meant to be about, so I better say something about it. Now, I'm going to give you a blatant plug. Our institute has put together a resource called Press On, Building Resilience and Mental Wellbeing, which has a whole range of activities and resources that you can work through to create habits to both help prevent you moving into excess stress, or if you are feeling very stressed, to be able to bring that back under control. And I'm going to show you a little clip about that in just a moment. But for now, what I want to do tonight is, I'm not going to run through all of that, that would be here a long time, but I want to speak briefly about 4 things related to what we've been talking about. So the first one, I want to say something about our bodies. If stress is a response in our bodies, what can we do with our bodies that helps us manage that stress? I want to talk about external stressors. What can we do to keep them under control? And then internal stressors. How can we manage them well? And then finally, I want to say something about connecting with others. But look, we've got a little video clip here. I think it runs for 3 or 4 minutes. It's just give you a little bit of a picture of our Press On course, and it's talking about our bodies and what we need to do with our bodies to manage stress. So just have a look at this. Let's talk about sleep. Sleep really is God's gift to renew us each day. And we are kidding ourselves if we think we can get by with only a small amount of sleep. Now, God doesn't need it, does he? He neither slumbers nor sleeps, Psalm 121. But Psalm 127, he gives sleep to those he loves. Now, there's sometimes pressures of life that bring sleepless nights. You see that in the people like the Apostle Paul. And of course, there's various medical conditions and other things that can interfere with our sleep. But sometimes we don't sleep because of foolish choices we make with our lifestyle. The research suggests that nearly all of us need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours sleep each night. And there's really clear evidence if you get less than 6 hours sleep, that has all sorts of long-term health consequences. Now, a whole lot of biological processes are taking place while we sleep. They're not all fully understood. But one of the things that happens, they think, is that our brain cells, our neurons, they actually shrink. And the scientists think that that allows the fluid in our brains to get around more easily and to remove those toxins from our brain. It's sort of like the system gets flushed out. There's also evidence that while we sleep, our memories become consolidated. And another interesting thing that's come out of the research, there's the suggestion that one of the biggest causes for not getting enough sleep is not insomnia, but people procrastinating. You know, we're actually getting sidetracked into doing other things when we should be priming ourselves to get ready to go to bed.
One of the things that I've had to develop as a habit is how to moderate and manage my sleep. I find that I need to be relaxed when I go to bed and not to have racing thoughts or what's happening tomorrow going on inside.
God made our bodies to move. Sitting all day is not good for us. Exercise is so important in getting rid of stress hormones. We need blocks of time when we get our heart rate up. Even 5 minutes of vigorous exercise gets rid of adrenaline. Basically anything that gets us breathing hard for a while is good for us. So if you're not able to do that, then just move. A short, slow walk is better than staying in a chair or on a lounge all day. Even fidgeting does us good. It's been shown that exercise is really helpful for people who have mild to moderate depression. Personally, I exercise because I know it's good for me, and it helps everything about me. It helps me sleep, and I come home from a walk and I actually feel a lot better.
Eating and sleeping are connected, and what we eat affects our brain chemistry. How we sleep affects our brain chemistry. When I went to medical school in the 80s, there were certain hormones that didn't exist that we know a lot about now that are affected by our sleep and our food. Hormones like leptin and ghrelin. But fundamentally, there are certain foods that will stimulate you and affect your sleep. Predominantly, over time, excessive processed food, sugars have a very negative effect. It makes people hungry again and again. It can create inflammation. And then there are other stimulants that can affect people very powerfully. Caffeine is a significant one, so I like coffee, but I don't drink it after midday. It affects me. And also the timing of alcohol. If you use alcohol, that can have a fairly negative effect on how you sleep. So it interferes with your deep sleep section, and that's the part that restores you when we look at our cycles of sleep.
Okay, so that's just a little clip. The third in the triad to do with our bodies that's important is what we, that was there. Okay, so there's the three: exercise, sleep, nutrition. I just want to say something briefly about relaxation. So remember, the stress response in our bodies, it's meant to be a short-term thing for short-term threats. So after we do that, after we do something stressful, we need time to allow our bodies to relax and to calm down again. And particularly after doing something stressful. And a really helpful thing that calms us is our breathing. Because normally when we're under stress, we breathe fast and shallow. And that can make us feel more anxious. So slow breathing slows down not only our breathing, but a whole lot of other physical processes in our bodies. And that can be very calming for us. So just one little example of this, there's a thing called box breathing. If you just imagine, the easiest way to do this is to stand next to a window or a picture frame or something like that, and you breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Now I know it sounds really weird, but it's amazing how if you practice that, how you can get yourself into a system of breathing really well that helps to calm you down. And they're just finding other things in your life that you find calming, build those into your life, whether it's getting out in nature, listening to some quiet music, whatever it is. Okay, so that's our bodies. Second thing, let's talk about our stressors, okay? So when stressed, we've got two options. If we're going to change anything, we can either change the environment out there, the external, or we can change what's happening here in our heads, the internal. Let's start with the external. I suppose if there's one thing that this pandemic has taught us, it's that there are lots of things outside our control, okay? And I think that illusion of control that so many of us in the Western world have, that's really taken a big hit, hasn't it? And it's very important to remember this. There are so many things we cannot control. We cannot control other people. Right? You can't even control your children, for those of you who are parents. And so many other events. We've got no control over the weather. And whether it's going to be fine when you go on holidays. It was so lovely to have some sunny days over Easter, wasn't it? You may have heard of the Serenity Prayer. It goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There is great wisdom in that, actually. But as the prayer acknowledges, there are some things we can change in our environment. So here's just a few examples. let's just say you're stuck in traffic. And there's nothing you can do about the traffic, you can't control that. But if you've got the music, your radio turned right up and the music's blaring, that will add to your stress level. So turn it off, put something calm on. You've made a change in your environment which will lower the amount of stress. Another thing you can do is to say no. You heard of that word? You can be asked to do something and you know it's beyond your capacity, and so you politely decline the request. If you're experiencing stress at work due to perhaps unrealistic expectations or something else, you can talk to someone about that and ask if any changes are possible. People are not mind readers, and if they don't have the information, if you don't communicate it, other people don't know. Another example, if you're feeling stressed about a relationship difficulty, you can have a conversation with that person and try and resolve the matter. You may need to make an apology or ask for forgiveness. But remember, we cannot control other people. They may not accept your apology. And that's an example of when perhaps what's going on with our internal stressors can come into play. So if I can't control others and their responses, if there are changes in the environment that I can't make, I can make some adjustments in my own attitudes, my own mindset, and to how I interpret the circumstances in which I find myself. So if you've tried to resolve a relationship difficulty and the other person's not prepared to budge, that might be incredibly painful. There might be ongoing grief associated with that. But if you say to yourself, I have done all that I can do, over time, that shift in mindset will help to gradually lower stress levels. Another important part of our mindset is acknowledging our strengths. Now, can I ask, who's found the last couple of years completely straightforward? No, probably none of us, okay? But I want to say to you, here you are, right? You're here. You've pulled through. You've come through this. I know it's not over yet, but you're here. You've persevered, you've managed whatever the stresses and strains. That takes strength. And for many, of course, the last couple of years have been incredibly difficult, and people have shown extraordinary perseverance. Even our mindset around stress can be a game changer. Did you know the more stressed you are about being stressed, the more stressful that is? And if you see stress as being sort of a challenge rather than a threat, that will help to calm you as well. And this means, of course, that it's actually very important to acknowledge when there is stress in your life. If you try and push it away, it's a little bit like trying to force a beach ball down underwater, okay? It just keeps popping up. When we acknowledge it, it actually starts to shift the impact it has, because under stress, the emotional centres, parts of our brain, tend to be, functioning very strongly. But when we start to acknowledge stress, it starts to bring into play our thinking and decision-making processes. And that means we can start to be a bit more thoughtful, a bit more deliberate, and take action, and that reduces stress. So what can really help from making that shift from feeling highly stressed to being able to be more thoughtful about it is actually to write stuff down. I really encourage you to write stuff down. That brings the thinking part of our brain much more into play. Shifting our mindset, though, is easier said than done. And this is because when we're under stress, we tend to lock on to certain thoughts, and we find it hard to get rid of them and to push them out of the way. And the more we think about something, the stronger the neural pathways associated with that thought become. It's almost like that thought starts to wear a rut into our brain, which gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And the deeper that it gets, the harder it is to pull yourself up out of it. So that chatter in our brains, those ruminating thoughts, that can be very hard to shift. So what can we do about this? Well, often that negative mind chatter does one of two things. It either looks back to the past with regret and that's stressful, or it looks to the future with worry, and that's stressful. And there's a really interesting study done back in 2010 by some researchers from Harvard University when the smartphone hadn't been around that long. And basically what they did, random points of the day, they pinged people, sent them a message and said, okay, what are you thinking right now? What's going through your head? And how are you feeling? And what they found was 47% of the time people's minds were wandering to the past or to the future. And when their minds were wandering, they actually felt worse than when they were in the moment. And when they wrote up their study, they called it a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So here's the key point. What can calm the chatter is focusing on the present, being in the moment, particularly the information coming in through our senses. When we tune into the things around us, many of them, of course, very beautiful things, and pay attention to them, that has a calming effect. So I have a question for you. Has anyone noticed a tree today? Now, some of you heard me ask this question last year. I love trees, okay? And I won't tell you my tree for today because I'll distract myself from what I'm meant to be doing. Wherever I go, I try and notice the trees and the flowers. I could tell you all about my walk today, but no, don't go there. I'm over time. Listen to the birds. Notice the changing light as the sun goes down, the twilight, the silhouettes of the trees in the distance on the horizon. These are beautiful things. And when you focus on these things, they calm our minds and they stop some of that chatter that's going on. I spoke earlier about how stress can interfere with our sleep. Recently, I was very worried about something. I wasn't sleeping and I couldn't get to sleep. And I had these thoughts racing through my head. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to stop. I couldn't see much. It was pretty dark. But I thought, what can I hear? What can you hear? So I could hear some cars in the distance. At one point I heard some footsteps. I heard a dog barking. I didn't hear much else. But the next thing I knew, I was asleep. Okay? So that's being in the present to manage negative thoughts. Just a couple more things. Gratitude. Okay? Another thing that really helps shift our minds from negative thoughts is to deliberately focus upon positive things. Things that I can be thankful for, to thank God for. And writing down 3 things a day at the end of the day is what my wife Sarah regularly does. A little notebook. I'm thankful to God for 1, 2, 3. You know what it does? It trains your brain to, you know how I said we've got a negativity bias? It just trains your brain to start to shift to a positivity focus, that word, whatever it is, to start noticing the positive things. And that's really good for us. Okay, last thing here, Christian faith. I want to say, if you're a Christian believer, our faith has a profoundly beneficial effect upon our mindset, because it actually speaks right into our worries and our regrets. Now, I read an article by a Christian psychologist where she said that when we bring our concerns before God in prayer, we are entering into, she said, the most emotionally safe space in the universe. And I think she's right. The place where we are fully known and yet, fully loved. That's what happens when we come before God through the work of our Lord Jesus Christ. All the junk in our life, right? All the stuff about ourselves that we don't like, we don't want other people to know about, things that make us feel guilty and ashamed, all the lies we believe about ourselves, all dealt with, put away when we come into the presence of God. They're gone. And God welcomes us with joy and with delight. And for me, nothing calms my heart more than knowing this truth and reflecting upon this truth and knowing that I actually have peace in my heart through knowing this particular truth. It's life-changing. Okay, final thing before I conclude, connecting with others. The research shows that people who have high levels of social support, that is, they have friends and network of people around them, show lesser levels of stress-related health outcomes. When we socialise with others, when we look a person in the eyes, our body releases oxytocin and other chemicals that have a calming effect on our body and on our stress response. Soldiers on the battlefield who have been exposed to trauma, when they come out of that situation, find themselves socially isolated, they are much more likely to experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And this points to the fact that connecting with others reduces our stress response. This, of course, is why lockdowns had such a devastating effect on the mental health of so many people, particularly those who are living alone. So, one of the most important things to manage stress is to stay connected with other people. Value your friendships, your family, your connections. Make that a priority in your life. And can I say, if you don't know where to go to make friends, if you're online and you're on your own, join a church community and connecting with other people there. That can be a huge benefit. Okay, time to wrap up. When we're feeling stress, sometimes we feel so stuck, we can't see any possibility of change, and any change seems just too hard. So I want to put a little challenge out to you, or an encouragement, not a challenge. I said small changes can make a big impact. So here's a really simple plan. It involves doing two things. Each day, I want you to plan, schedule, and do two things. Okay? Plan, work out. This is what I'm going to do. Schedule, you put it into your program. Do, you actually do it. So the first thing, each day, do at least one activity that is fun or relaxing, enjoyable. Okay, whether it's going for a walk, doing some gardening, doing some sewing, some woodwork, whatever, reading a book, listening to music. One fun activity. Second, do at least one activity that gives you a sense of achievement, that helps you to feel good about yourself, or that gives you a sense of meaning, or gives you a sense of satisfaction. So something that fits with your values and your interests. It might be something to do with your work. It might be meeting up with a friend and having a conversation. Anything that involves other people, as I said, is really helpful. Okay, stress is part of life, but there are things we can do that can make a real difference to how it impacts us. And as I suggested, if you haven't checked out the Christian faith as an adult, I'd really encourage you to do that, because personally, I think it can be a game changer. But there's also no weakness in recognising that when things get out of hand, we might need further help, and that's really worth seeking out if that's the case. Thank you very much.